Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us at the LLF. And we are joined by Maha Khan Phillips, who is an absolutely fantastic writer who is known for her work, particularly most recent work on historical fiction, thriller, fantasy genres, which is the Curse of Mohenjo-Daro. My name is Noor. Thank you again to Iman and the LLF for inviting us. I'll start by introducing Maha Khan Phillips, and then we'll get right into discussing this and introducing the book that we're discussing today, and then we'll get right into our question and answers. And of course, if you are watching this on Facebook Live, please post your questions below, and we'd love to address them in the hour or so that we have for this panel. So just to get started, Maha Khan Phillips is a multiple award-winning financial journalist and the author of Beautiful from This Angle, The Mystery of the Agni Ruby, and The Curse of Mohenjo-Daro. She grew up in Karachi, Pakistan, and has a bachelor's degree in politics and international relations and a master's in international conflict analysis from the University of Kent at Canterbury. In 2006, she completed a master's degree in creative writing from City University in London, where she currently lives with her husband and son. So thank you so much, Maha, for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'll start by summarizing the Curse of Mohenjo-Daro and introducing it to our readers, to our listeners. So this is a story that exists in two time eras and has a wide range of characters and historical references, and primarily is set between London and Pakistan, and also a little bit in California as well. So when we start in 2016 AD, which is just a few years ago, when footage of a team of archaeologists bursting into flames at the ancient site of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan goes viral, the world is horrified and shaken. While authorities suspect it to be an incendiary terrorist attack, Nadia Osborne determines to find her archaeologist sister Leila, convinced that she has survived. Her frantic search takes her to the ruins and forces her to confront her own demons, her inexplicable dreams about a woman named Jaya. The second part of the story, which sort of interspersed with the plot line that's running in 2016, occurs in 3800 BC, which is the story of Jaya, who's the character who occurs in Nadia's dreams. The city of Meluha is on the brink of a revolution, and Eaf, and Maha, you should correct me in my pronunciations if I'm getting the characters' names wrong, and his coterie of corrupt priests will do anything to maintain their power. Jaya is the only one who can read the bloodstone, the heart of the goddess Shakari, and divine the future. But with her daughter under Eaf's control, will Jaya be able to prevent what is to come? So this book is inspired by the legend surrounding the lost Indus Valley city, Mohenjo-Daro, and it's a gripping thriller about a relic, a sinister cult, and family secrets that haunt generations. I recently finished it, and as I was telling Maha before we started this panel, I have nightmares about the cult that exists at the heart of this story. And so I have a bone to pick with you for that reason, because it was a very stressful experience, as well as a very gripping, edge of your seat reading experience as well. I really want to start with like a really simple question: is what drew you to the civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, when you started writing the book? And could you start by telling me your research process when you started diving into that historic period?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a long answer, or a long dated answer, in that I first traveled to Mohenjo-Daro when I was, I think, 10 or 11 on a school trip, and I thought it was this magical place. I kind of fell in love. But, I was young and I sort of forgot about it. And then a couple of years later, we went back on another school trip, and I remember standing in the Great Bath, because in those days they let you kind of wander everywhere in this kind of amazing ruin, and thinking, wow, people have been in here before me. But even then, I sort of just, kind of forgot about it, except I remember that one of our tour guides had said, nobody knows what happened to the people of Mohenjo-Daro. We still don't have the explanation. And years later, I was idly Googling, and I thought, oh, and let's see what actually happened to the people of Mohenjo-Daro. I'm sure, what I remember as a child isn't actually what history will tell me. And instead of looking at, research and history, I ended up somehow immersed in this world of forbidden archaeology, which is a movement of people that think that science is suppressing the truth. and archaeologists have been forced to tell a lie, and that actually humans have existed on this planet for billions of years and evolved and then unevolved and destroyed themselves and then evolved again, and that various archaeological discoveries will prove this. And these people.
Sorry to interrupt you, but so from just reading historical archaeology stuff,
Yeah.
how did you find forbidden
I
art?
think I literally put in Mohenjo-Daro mystery, and
Oh.
I got to these pages, and there was, so there were the writings of Graham Hancock and David Childress and people who talk about, fingerprints of the gods and who built the pyramids in Egypt. It was this really interesting world.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just sort of thought this is a great place to write a thriller. This is a great setting for a thriller. And that's how I started. And I originally started without thinking about Mohenjo-Daro so much, but thinking about that movement of forbidden archaeology and kind of tracing a modern day thriller. And I kind of stayed away from Mohenjo-Daro because I got very trapped in this notion of, we don't know much about this place. We don't know much about this civilization, so I can't write about it. So at the beginning, I sort of stayed away from it.
In a way, it's a little freeing, I guess, when you don't know enough about, at least history doesn't know enough about a place. You can just create whatever you want. And you do say at the end of I guess in the afterword, I think you said that you took a lot of historical liberties, which makes Mohenjo-Daro kind of a place ripe for creativity. I wonder then, like, there was so much that occurred in the 3800 BC time period, which was, you divide clans in the society that exists back then. You divide them into clans like the crocodiles, the buffaloes, the tiger, and then you have the priestesses of a sort, or the priest class. I was wondering what to me, it felt like I was reading about castes, or I was reading about the ancient versions of caste, class, all that ties into Pakistani life. So could you tell me a little bit about your inspiration for the divisions that you created in those clans?
Yeah, and well, so to begin with, actually, a friend of mine had said exactly what you just said. Isn't it freeing to be liberated from constraints? So go for it. So then I thought, okay, well, my imagination, I can do anything I want here now. And it was fantastic. But to make it believable for myself, it had to be immersed in something that felt real or authentic. And the caste system does feel like historically something that would have progressed or could have progressed. And so for me, that sort of became a clan system. I just played around with the seals, the images of, that we have these fantastic images, which were probably very boringly for administrative purposes, but I thought it would be fun to turn them into a caste system. And then I looked at a lot of like what was happening in Mesopotamia and the sort of headdresses and costumes and food, and thought, okay, I can play around with that a little bit. And then fundamentally, what I was interested in is what happens to civilizations when they fail. And obviously, we've all seen what corruption can do. We've all seen what power can do. And so I wanted to bring that in as well.
That's interesting, because it was what, I don't want to bring up spoilers for those of you who are watching and haven't read the book. In as broad terms as I can say, that the society that Maha wrote about in the past is very much a failing society, where because of these caste-based distinctions, there's so much inequality, and it is sort of gearing up for a revolution of sorts that's building up towards in the novel. In a similar extent, now going to the present day events of 2016 onwards, you have the story of two sisters, and they're both half sisters, and they've been raised, or one of them mostly was raised in a cult. So could you tell me about like there seemed to be, on the surface when I was reading it, I was like, there's so many elements here that you researched. You had to research Mohenjo-Daro or some version of, these the hidden archaeology, as you brought it up. And then you have to look up like the way certain cults work. And bringing that all together is really a difficult challenge, which you pulled off really well. So can you tell me about like, what kinds of cults did you look at? Did you read into particular ones? How did you bring it all together?
So I did. I read all the kind of documentation, well, not all, but a lot of autobiographies of people who had left cults, particularly Scientology. I thought that was a a really interesting
Mm.
one I read, Going Clear. And the thing that fascinated me was the kind of psychology of the cult and the reinforcement idea. So you reinforce a concept for so long that people just believe it. And you see that mirrored now in the way that, you know, we all have myopic views in social media. And so I found that really interesting, but I also found it really interesting that well-educated and people who would consider themselves quite clever tend to believe in or join cults more because people who are less educated are wary of the things they don't understand. So they ask more questions. Whereas if you're supremely well educated, you think you know better. So I thought it was just that psychology was so interesting and the sense of belonging. So given the fact that it was this forbidden history movement, and I was reading people very passionately arguing about, you know, ancient aliens and everything online, I thought a cult was a perfect way to draw into some of those.
What you just said about, you know, people who think they're very educated and smart and believe that they're above all this. It was very interesting that the character who creates this cult, who creates this movement, is Sohail, who the father of Nadia and Leila, who are the two half sisters. And he has an agenda, which I don't want to go into for spoilers territory, but Sohail has this agenda that brings together the past and what is happening currently between the two sisters. And he is behind a lot of the machinations of what's going on in the story. But he's also this very messiah-like figure in his own cult and is the cause for a lot of Nadia's and to an extent Leila's trauma and pain. And so I found it interesting that Sohail as a character, he comes from an upper class Karachi family background. He, as a character, when you built up his history, you didn't spend a long time writing about Sohail's backstory, but you managed to fit a lot into a chapter or a few pages. And I found that character to be really, really, you know, relatable, because not relatable, but I guess a very entitled man who sort of has this God complex. And I was wondering, could you tell me a little bit about what you were processing and what you were reading and how your writing process for Sohail specifically worked? Because he was just a fascinating personality in the novel for me.
Well, he was really hard for me because I couldn't really, he was very hard to pin down. So I did actually do a long backstory for him for myself, but I knew I wanted him to be of a certain class because of the way the story unravels. I knew I wanted him to be educated. I decided that he should have some sort of drug addiction, some sort of fantasy life of his own going on, but that he should also be on a bit of a power trip and be a bit of a megalomaniac. And I wanted him to be mild. So I wanted him to come across as very unthreatening, very erudite, someone you could have a cup of tea with anywhere in the world. And because that's how you become attached to people, right? That no one comes across scary, otherwise you wouldn't follow them. So yeah, I struggled with him quite a bit. So if I got him, I'm very happy to hear it. But yeah, it was a challenge.
He definitely was the biggest subject of my nightmares when I was in the middle of reading this book. And I think for those of you who will pick up this book or hopefully have already read this book, definitely go and pay attention to Sohail's character, because he is extremely important to the way this novel works. And in a way, he mirrors like the megalomania of the priest is it Ayaf? Is that how you pronounce his name?
You know, it's funny that you say that because it looks good on the page. So even I don't know how to pronounce it.
Okay.
But that's how I've been pronouncing it.
Yeah. So Ayaf is essentially the villain in the past. He's the ruler of of the ancient site of what was with the pre-Mohenjo-Daro area. And so you have these two messianic figures existing in two different in two different eras, and they have a connection that forms the crux of what the story becomes. But also the crux of the story is these women who are all, very closely tied together. One, Jaya forms the dreams of Nadia, and her story is running parallel. Did you, when you were writing the story, these two parallel timelines, did you start by writing one story timeline through to its completion? Did you write them at the same time? How did the process of working in two timelines impact your writing process?
So I started off actually with 2 points of view and no historical timeline. So I started
Oh,
off with Nadia and Lela, and without giving too much away about Lela, was how she might be indoctrinated into seeing her father's point of view. And so there was a lot more of the cult in the first version, but it wasn't working. And then I had two dream sequences. So I had Nadia having two dreams about Jaya, and I really liked those. And those are actually in the book. And that's when I had that, oh God, I've got to get Mohenjo-Daro in there. And I did, but I wrote them. So I wrote one in the present, one in the past, one in the present, and I did that because it helped me with the kind of pace of the book and the narrative of the book. And rather than kind of, chopping and changing and trying to figure out the flow, it was easier for me to do it that way.
There's the pace of the book is extremely fast paced, and it moves at a very with a very frantic energy because so much is happening in a short period of time. And that's kind of what I enjoyed about it, because a lot of literature, specifically South Asian literature, tends to be more descriptive than action packed. And this, as you describe, is a thriller. And so I really, really enjoyed it. But within that thriller, the thriller sort of genre, it's a lot of it is about Nadia's trauma, and I guess the trauma that a lot of characters go through. And in particular, how she, we start out with meeting Nadia in the beginning of the book, is a character who has successfully, or I mean, maybe she will see it as not successfully, have escaped the cult or left the cult. She's a successful author. She's struggled with alcoholism and addiction in her life as a result of her trauma, and she's trying to recover, and then she gets pulled back into her because of her sister's disappearance or involvement with this violent action that took place in Pakistan. And what was your process like working through a character like Nadia, who there's a lot of processing of her own trauma in the book? She's a very suspicious character of so many people around her. So I found that you did a really good job making her character someone believably who suffered. So could you tell me a little bit about how you worked through her?
The challenge with her was not to make her angry all the time, because I thought if I had gone through what she had gone through, I would just be insufferable. So it was to
She's
sort
a
of
difficult person, though, honestly.
But she's a difficult, prickly person.
Tough person to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, some people have said she was so unlikable. So why? But so that was the challenge for me, was just kind of talk through the journey. And the dreams were important as you go on to see from the plot. So it was important that she had that reoccurring kind of almost traumatic experience through her dreams. So I felt like she was quite raw, even though she had given up alcohol, even though she was sober. I felt she was always raw, a little bit protective, fiercely protective of the people that she loved because she had lost so much. But willing to kind of, but also stubborn and prickly, and very easily could have thrown it away because she didn't think things through.
That's actually a good place to bring in some questions. So from Kamila Shamsie, who's watching our talk, she wanted you to talk about the experience of visiting Mohenjo-Daro. How far into planning or writing the book were you by that point? And I remember you said you avoided Mohenjo-Daro.
I didn't avoid it. I just couldn't get there, actually, while I was writing. But towards the end, it's very kind of Kamila Shamsie to ask that question, because she was with me.
Oh, okay.
When we went on our expedition, and I was, so a group of us went, and I was so excited. I mean, I just had been dreaming to go back for years. But I'd pretty much written the book at that point. And I remember there was this fantastic moment where I had been Googling, using Google Maps, and I'd been, working out where everything was in relation to everything else. And I got there and I realized I had it totally wrong. And that was quite a moment, because then I had to go back and fix it. But so I went right at the very end of the writing process, twice actually. We went back twice. And I've been to lots of places, historical ruins in my life, and I'm obviously biased because I love the place, but for me, it is just one of the most magical
Hmm.
experiences ever. And I hope I get to go again and again and again. And I keep boring my family to tears by
Did you
asking
have to
when
change a
to go.
lot of the book while you were writing?
No,
While after reading it?
I just had to sort of say, no, actually the airport is not here, it's here. And
Mhm.
no, this the stupa is not here, it's here in relation to, where these two-story houses were. So it wasn't that hard, but it was just like, oh, despite all the research, you never know until you get there.
That's
Uh,
true. That's true. This is another question from Raheen Mani. Did you know how your story would end from the beginning of the writing process?
no, so I knew that I was writing about this forbidden science movement. I knew that there had to be this mysticism of a bloodstone. I knew there was going to be a revolution, but I didn't know how to bring those elements together, and I didn't know what the end would be. And in fact, I kind of changed the end, not to give it away, but the character that kind of brings about this revolution or this sort of destruction ended up being very different to what I had envisioned in my head.
Wow, because it felt like when I was reading it and when I went back to the beginning, a lot of things, choices you made at the end, felt like it had been a very tightly plotted book. Like, there was a lot that made sense from beginning to end. So I didn't get that impression at all.
I
That's
think
interesting.
that's the benefit of 7 drafts of a
Yeah.
novel,
Oh,
of
wow.
the reiteration, the edits.
Yeah. So this is sort of going back to a little bit about your creative process, and we're getting a lot of questions. So I will get back to those questions at some point. But I'm very curious about, like, you wrote this also at the end of the book that during your writing process you were diagnosed with cancer, and that's obviously a difficult thing to work to get through as you're doing something that's extremely ambitious, that's this book. So how did an illness affect your motivation and your process as you were writing?
So no matter what happens for the rest of my life, I will be profoundly grateful for this book because I think it kept me sane in difficult times. Um, I was very lucky for most of my experience that I had a decent prognosis. But I remember after my second surgery, right after I got back from the hospital, I sort of asked my mom, I said, can you bring me my laptop desk and my laptop? And I'm going to keep writing. And she was like, you just got back. And I said, no, 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 I just want to keep going. And it was just cathartic. It was a way to just, forget about the complexities of the health situation and throw myself into something else. And I was very, very grateful, especially because in the middle it did get a little complicated with some confusion. So it felt like, I know it's very cheesy to say, but it felt like I was achieving more than finishing a book.
Wow.
So I will be forever grateful.
I mean, it is certainly something to applaud, like finishing a book and dealing with an illness. Like, I think during these times when we're all in a pandemic, or many of us are, I've either had COVID or suffered through it, like, it is extremely hard to be creative. So I wonder, like, how you are dealing with the pandemic right now. Is that affecting your writing process? Is it any different from when you were dealing with cancer?
So it's a very weird thing, and
Yeah.
where I wrote my first novel, Beautiful from This Angle, mostly or a lot of it when I was going through maternity leave. So it was a period of stillness.
Hmm.
And then I had a back problem and I was flat on my back, and that's when I wrote The Mystery of the Agni Ruby. And then, the cancer happened. So I don't know, I'm sort of jinxed or lucky that I had these moments where everything stopped.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a surprise that when I'm finishing my next book, it's gone really well for me in the
Hmm.
pandemic.
Hmm.
Touch wood. I know that's not everybody's experience, but as difficult as it is, as scary as it has been in the outside world, it's kind of been nice to be insular and to have some
Yeah.
time to just stop
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, this is speaking about your next book. Saifullah is asking, can you tell us more about it?
So it is based and inspired by a real event, a true story. So in the year 2000, I don't know how many people are familiar with this because I wasn't until until it was brought to my attention. But in the year 2000, a mummy was found in Balochistan. And this mummy was incredible. It was a woman, and she had a gold-plated chest of cuneiform writing. And the writing said she was the daughter of King Xerxes of Persia. And there was tremendous excitement that maybe Iran had mummies, thousands of years ago, and nobody knew about it. And then there's an incredible archaeologist in Karachi named Asma Ibrahim who took charge of this mummy, and over the several months proved not only that she was a fake, but she was also potentially a murder victim. And this is all true. And Asma kind of had this incredible journey that she went through, proving this hoax. But we know that there was at least one more mummy for sale. So someone was trying to sell this mummy for $11 million. And we know that there was at least one more. Certainly, there's a strong suspicion that there were quite a few. You have to mummify within 24 hours of somebody's passing. So either a woman was murdered, which is quite likely from the way that the body was, or she was dug up after she died and mummified in a very sophisticated manner, that it took a while to sort of, go through and systematically identify the forgery. So for me, that was fascinating, and I just wanted to write about it. But I sort of used it as a launch pad to write, to inspire my own fiction. So I do take the actual events of a mummy being found and someone trying to sell it. But then I have a child who is missing, and the kind of story of a missing girl and this mummy discovery. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's a very interesting genre of, like, not genre, but I see that the trope of a missing child, specifically a girl, and then this tying into your interest in archaeology or hoaxes or things like that. It's
incredible.
It's an incredible way of tying things, a lot of your interests together. Are you?
Well, I have learned a lot about mummies, which I'm doing myself nightmares as well. And
oh my God,
weird and wonderful world. Like, I mean, I read, and I was so shocked that the Victorians used to take mummies and grind them up and create a mummy brown paint that they would use to paint their walls. And that paint was on sale until 1964. And that's when they ran out of mummy bud pieces and stopped selling that. So there's all this kind of grisly, gruesome stuff that I immersed myself in as well.
Oh my God. Can we expect some of that gruesomeness in your next book?
I'm afraid so.
Oh no. I'm wondering, is this going to be in the realm of mystery thrillers as well, or like with some twists and all that exciting stuff?
Definitely a mystery thriller. Okay. I think there's not the fantastical element that Mohenjo-Daro had. It's more of a crime story, I think.
That's really exciting. I'm really enjoying the spate of thrillers that are coming out of Pakistan. I think that there's a number of books that have happened over the last few years that are really exciting. Like one of them being yours, and I'm wondering, like, if you are you reading any other authors, not just Pakistani, but generally people who are helping you write as you continue working on this novel?
It's an interesting one because I'm quite eclectic in my reading. I'm sure everybody is, or most of us are. So I love all the sort of Pakistani fiction and always have. And I love, in terms of thrillers, like Omar Shahid Hamid, I thought his books were fantastic. But I also love, the writing we all grew up with, but then, the sort of, Jane Austen is my favorite author, and Margaret Atwood and Hilary Mantel. But then I read sort of Kate Moss, whose archaeology thrillers I've always been a huge fan of. And when I was, sort of Michael Crichton, it's sort of, again, this weird and wonderful world of like amber found in that can bring DNA in. And so growing up, I used to love Tom Clancy, although now I can see what an awful misogynist he was. So I read thrillers as they come out, but I also read a variety of different things, as I'm sure most of us do.
I think I read online, this is a very selfish question, so our audience should bear with me. I will get to your questions. We have a few more. But this is, I read online that you really like romance, fantasy, and a lot of like very escapist stories like that. And I'm desperately looking for, in this pandemic, to read escapist romance fantasy. So do you have any recommendations?
I think mine are very bodice rippery, so I'm not sure.
No, I
My
love that.
I have to have a little thing. My son keeps complaining that every time he walks into the room, I'm reading some sort of period drama or watching something on Netflix. So yeah, I'll have a hunt through. But yeah, I love. I think escapism is so great right
Yeah,
now.
definitely in
Um,
this pandemic.
yeah,
Usman Hadi is asking, is there anything about the book that you would change? The
is
Curse
there
of
anything?
Mohenjo-Daro, that
It's
is.
so hard. It's so hard to answer that in retrospect.
Yeah,
Um, I probably would change everything because you're your worst critic, right? So
yeah.
I can't I wouldn't be able to read it again, I don't think, and
Mhm, mhm.
not want to change this or this or this.
Yeah.
But
So you
maybe I have
generally,
less things happening.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you generally like go back and read the work that you've written?
No,
Yeah,
because
it must.
then that voice goes. I mean, do
Yeah.
you?
No, I haven't. I mean, I haven't written that much, but I find short stories are generally easier to go back through and be like, it's a short story. I can get away with, not including this or not changing that. But with a novel, I would imagine it's more complicated.
It's very difficult when you box
Yeah.
yourself in one way. But yeah, I would. I find it hard to go back and not think about that.
Hmm. This is also a really interesting question from Momina, who's asking, to what extent was your imagination intrinsic versus your childhood influences intrinsic to the writing process? Like, how did the two play together? Because I know you visited Mohenjo-Daro a lot as a kid.
I mean, that is interesting. Well, I think it was kind of good that I didn't go back when I was writing it because it becomes larger than life in your head. You know, you have your childhood memory becomes something that it's not, and
Mm,
it's quite freeing rather than thinking, oh, this is what I saw and this is the technical reason.
mhm,
But also, I mean, in terms of childhood values, I guess I grew up in a family that's very imaginative,
mhm,
very creative, full of writers and artists and fashion designers and furniture designers. So someone was always, you know, telling a story or doing something remarkable or jumping out of a bush to scare you. So
mhm.
there was a lot of that as well. So I think we've always been an imaginative bunch, and it's always been kind of natural to create stories as a family.
Yeah. Mhm. This is going a little bit more into your career. You're a financial journalist by day, if
Mm.
that's that a good way to describe it. And that's extremely different from being an author of extremely imaginative fiction. So I'm wondering, how did you move from finance journalism into fiction writing?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a writer long before I wanted to be a journalist. And trust me, my friends still laugh
Mhm.
when I tell them I'm a financial journalist because I don't have a very logical mind at all. But I sort of, it was a haphazard way that I started with sort of more political analysis stuff and then ended up in this world of financial journalism. And the reason it worked is because, um, journalists have to ask that question, which of sort of, who wins and who loses and who cares. And there's a sort of human element. And I found that was a really interesting way to approach journalism. And
Mhm.
then because I was so scared in those initial days as a financial journalist that I was getting things wrong. So when something would be published, I'd say, okay, phew, nobody's, it's fine. And I think that was actually something that helped me be brave in my fiction, because if I could do that, I could do this.
Yeah, I'm a fact checker reporter by day. So I do a lot of fact checking of fake news of what's going on these days with the Trump administration and
You
election.
must be so busy.
It's a pretty high stakes time because there's so much fake news going around. And so you're always scared because a lot of people like turn to us for literally getting the information right, because you have the president of the United States tweeting out a lot of fake stuff. And so I can understand the fear. It's a
Yeah.
very scary time and you have to get everything right. And in a way, reading and writing fiction is very freeing for journalists, because you
Yeah,
can
I
be
totally
like,
agree.
I
Yeah.
can say whatever I want. Who cares? This is fiction. I can just enjoy myself. And that's kind of why I like writing. Writing is, it feels like I'm freeing myself from the job that is forcing me to, I have to be right. And if I'm not right, it's going to get a lot of us in trouble.
I absolutely agree. I couldn't have put it better myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
I wonder though, it seems like they're so worlds apart, what you're doing in your day job and what you write uh, in the rest of your time. And I wonder if it's ever one has leaked into the other, not in a way of like making mistakes, but in terms of like, has research or the skills you've built up as a journalist, or or any items that you found in your career, has it influenced what you've written in your fiction?
I haven't linked them in terms of items in my career, but I think the research process, as you know, is the research process. And I think when you become good at sort of analyzing and researching quickly and also turning it around very quickly, it is a confidence boost, because you have to take this information and digest it quickly, but B, it's a skill, and novelists need it too, because everybody needs to know what they're writing about for this 15 minutes that we all try and learn about the things, but then we move on to the next thing, and that happens in journalism as well. I can't remember stories I wrote 5 years ago, but I can tell you a lot about what I'm writing now. So it's been really useful, and this book had a lot of research that Mohenjo-Daro didn't have, by virtue of the information not being there, but there is a lot of information about ancient Persia and that period, and Egyptology and mummies, and so I did find that the research skills are really useful.
Yeah, and I wonder if while you're writing, do you have it's a very weird, I don't know what other way to describe it, but are there different switches in your brain or different spaces you have to be in to write as a financial journalist versus writing as a fiction author? Like, how do you move from one to the other mentally?
I think it's as you described it for me anyway. So it's very disciplined. The day job is very disciplined, and it's very analytical, and you can't let your emotions be involved at all. And fiction is the opposite, or at least it is for me. It's very undisciplined and imaginative, and my emotions are all over the place because I get invested in my characters. So sometimes if I've had a long day at work on the journalism, I can't write fiction because I can't switch that brain off.
That's definitely, I think that, as you said, linking this to what you said before about, when you've had your creative times, when you were in moments of silence or solitude, or you were in your maternity leave or sort of stuck at home. And I wonder, like, this pandemic has had the opposite effect for a lot of us. I'll speak for myself, but I think that being in the same place and environment where you're working at home on your laptop, and then you're like, oh, I want to write my story, and then you go back to your same desk working on the laptop, and it has the opposite effect to creativity for me. So I think that in a way it's kind of, as you were saying, it's a mixed blessing that you were able to hone that by being at home and stuck at home for a while and able to work on both things at the same time. Another sort of shifting again back to the book. When I was reading it, I really felt like I wanted it to be a film or a TV show. And I really wish that Pakistan would make, or at least someone would make more thrillers that were set around stories that are based in Pakistan that are like this. And I'm wondering, would you ever write a screenplay or transform this into another genre, or work on putting it into another medium? Or do you have plans to do that?
So before I wanted to write novels, I wanted to write screenplays. But then I tried to write a screenplay once and realized how minimalist it is, and found it quite hard. I would love for somebody to pick it up. Please, if anybody's out there, go and pick it up and do something with it. Yeah, I mean, I also think they're writers, and that you just read every sentence of their prose, and you're just like gasping because it's so beautiful. But for me, I think it's about storytelling. And I think of myself as a storyteller, and I would love to have I would love to see something on film.
Yeah, this is definitely, as I was reading
But
it,
also like a
it did
Ferrari
feel like,
while we're
yeah, yeah. No, this is, while I was reading it, I was like, this is definitely something that I would love to see as a Netflix show, because it has all the elements, and it did feel like I was reading something that also a screenplay writer could have written. Because even as you're saying, like, there's screenplay writing is very minimalist, I think that your action scenes and the way you kept the pace moving so quickly and so efficiently was especially helpful to someone who likes thrillers and who prefers like the thriller element of every story. So this is another question we have from Mariam Khan, which I think you've answered earlier, but she's asking which writer inspires you, and I'll add on to that by asking, like, are there writers who are relatively newer to this genre that you worked in of thrillers, or generally in imaginative and fantasy fiction, who you would recommend that we read as well?
So it's really hard to say one writer
Yeah.
because I'm just inspired by so many different people and so many different writers. But if I had to say somebody who writes, historical fiction, fantasy specifically, then it would be Kate Moss. Because while there's a lot of men writing, there's not a lot of women's point of views that I've seen. So I think she's fantastic. But beyond that, it's very hard to say that one writer's been an inspiration. Maybe Frankenstein. I love Frank Mary. I love the Gothics,
Oh,
Phantom
yeah.
of the Opera, and Frank and Mary Shelley. And so I think those are spine-chilling, but really, really fun.
As you were saying that, like, as you mentioned, there's a lot of there weren't that many women in the genre, or aren't that many women working in this genre. I'm wondering what your publishing experience then was like, as you got into writing, and how did you have, this is a very cliched question, but was it difficult to get your foot in the door in terms of getting into this genre of thrillers and fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different in that I started off writing satire, so it was a different genre entirely. And that, of course, it was difficult, but it was also interesting for me because I thought I'd written something satirical, but with some important ideas, and then there was also a big sense of it being chick lit. So at the time, that was like me going, oh, okay, maybe, So and I think that's still, there's still an element of that, for at least from what I'm seeing or hearing from some of the sort of more commercial writers that I talk to or that I listen to. But I think I don't know how that. I just think I just keep writing and hope for the best.
Yeah, so for our viewers, you're talking about your first book, which was beautiful from this angle, which was a
Yes.
satire of Karachi society, and sort of, I think this was back in 2010 that you wrote
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is your first book, and it was very different from what you are currently writing and working on. So yeah, I think, do we have any more questions? I don't think so. I'm wondering, like, do you have any sort of things that you feel very strongly about that you want to talk about that I haven't addressed in our discussion? Because I feel like I've been just throwing a bunch of questions at you.
No, it's fantastic. Well, I think this question of the pandemic and people reading is I think it's great. I've seen so many people pick up books who just haven't ever read or haven't read for a long time. So it is a time to be reflective, and I'm just glad to see. I'm glad to see so many people picking up books.
Yeah, definitely. I will say that I have not read a book properly until I started reading your book, because it's been a struggle to actually read when you're sitting inside all day. It's had the opposite effect on me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is not great. But I've been seeing this response from a lot of people on Twitter, especially, who are like, actually, it's been very hard for me to read or to pick up a book, even though we have piles of them, all prepared for this pandemic, to quarantine or whatever. And then I open a book and I'm like, it's been really hard. I think it comes with being stuck in a certain environment. After a while, you don't draw much inspiration around you from that environment.
It's true.
Yeah, so it's
It's
definitely different for everyone.
yeah, and we all have to do whatever. Self-care is very important.
Exactly,
And whatever
exactly.
gets us through.
Exactly. So just to sort of wrap up, I'd love to know, like, you know, what else are you doing to nourish your creative life outside of reading and writing? Is there anything that you generally like to do, or to sort of keep your mind busy and occupied and ready to work on the next thing?
I, like probably all of us, have watched far too much Netflix.
Yeah.
And still do. But I'm finding in this time I'm reading a lot of like I've gone back to Terry Pratchett, for instance. You know, fantasy, comedy, dramedy. I think he's great.
Yeah.
I started going for walks, which is been really great, actually, going for very long walks and clearing my head and coming back and feeling a bit refreshed, because frankly, what else can we do? And like I said, I have a really creative family, and someone is always doing something incredibly fantastic. So I love, you know, being around them and chatting to them and seeing what they're all up to.
Wonderful. Yeah, that sounds really a great way to use one's time. So finally, well, thank you so much. This has been a really, really great discussion, and I've really enjoyed hearing from you. And yeah, I hope that we can keep talking, and I hope maybe we can have a similar conversation when your next book comes out, because I'm very excited to learn more what you draw from the hoax of the Persian mummy story, because I didn't know about that when you brought it up. So I'm very excited.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. And I'm sorry I gave you nightmares, but I'm kind of not sorry as well.
I hope the next one doesn't give me nightmares, but this one definitely did.
Well, this one gave me nightmares, so I hope it, yeah, let's see. The jury is out.
I'm sure it'll be enjoyable regardless. So I'm really excited to read it. And congratulations on all this wonderful work, and best of luck as you continue working on the next one.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
All right. Take care. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much again.
Bye.
Bye.